As you see or might listen in some of these lectures of today and tomorrow, some people think that there is already a war going on, a war about intellectual property, a war about information, a war about information society. Things are changing. Data processing and internet networking, they changed from a minor issue for a few freaks, like me, like some of you, to a part of everyday life. Computers and programs are now almost everywhere. We've reached a critical mass, and this critical mass has consequences. What's on the agenda? On the agenda now is surveillance. I think you all read about it. It's the dream of law enforcement about data mining. Those familiar with the e-business bubble that exploded a few years ago, that will come up now with law enforcement, and we'll see all the old arguments. All you have to do is to replace the word customer with the word criminal. Digital rights management, or as it should be better called, digital restriction management. Your PC owned by everybody, but just you. Because those who failed to adapt to internet and to networking, those who even have problems thinking about this new world of so-called new media, they try to go along with their old business models, and networking is in their way. Patents, well, the EPO, the European Patent Office, still thinks that its database of human knowledge will grow faster than the internet. It's information economy versus information society. In information economy, you are a good. You are a consumer, and what they are after is the money in your pocket. Too much progress is destabilization in that world. Too much progress means not being able to calculate, not having good business plans. So law must be applied so that development is slow and stable. And of course, those of you who are really creative must stay away from computers. Right now, while we are talking, someone is lobbying to steal what is already yours. Someone writes a proposal to terrorize users away from computers. Not only in France. With all these users scared away from computers, with programmers forced away from computers, with computers not being owned by the people who get them from the shops, with laws and content industry behind our neck, the information society will be replaced by something we think it's a nightmare. And there is just one way. Let us all go against these cyber terrorists like Sony. We can do it. Yes, we have software patents. The first step was done. And these future hacks are about communication. These future hacks we need are about overcoming the communication gap between the information society, between computer people, like me, like you, like us, and the so-called establishment. Decision makers, whatever. It's about overcoming these communication hassles and about developing a somewhat common view. Important, there is a fine line between public relation and propaganda. And a war for hearts and minds it's a little bit as speed seduction and speed. It's absolutely hopeless because it's not more than lying. Also leave the war in their heads. When the Business Software Alliance calls for the war against someone, we don't have to, because truth is our main ally, and the most valuable resource for communication is established trust. The software patents case was won because of trust. The trust of decision makers into people from FFII or others. And to establish all that, what I try to present you is one misguided model out of others that should help you if you communicate, if you write blogs, if you're doing anything that has to do with information you give away. The first thing is, in that model, items, like in this puzzle, are values, thoughts, rules. How is someone thinking about a specific issue? And what right does this person apply to him? It's like as if this stone in the puzzle would be something like, how important is child education for you? It's child education and all the values you apply to that. And items are bound together like neurons in networks. In fact, this is just another view on something that could also be viewed as a neuronal network. A transmission is information one partner sends to another, and of course hoping that it creates some kind of foreseeable effect, which is not always happen. Messages are parts of it, and it are requests to either present one of these items or change items. It's like asking someone, hey, what are you thinking about children education? What are you thinking about free software? What are you thinking about Microsoft? And transmissions can have from 0 to many messages. Transmissions like news with 0 value are very dangerous because people tend to invent their own messages into it. So if you give someone an empty bubble, he or she will try to fill it with something that makes sense from her point of view. Messages are evaluated in context to other messages, in context to the same message, and to already learned items. An explanation. Let's say that what we want to transmit is this one. We want to tell someone that a system like Echelon is spying on the whole European Union. The problem is with these two in place, like this one, oh, the US is our best friend. This item will not fit into that hole. So the first and important steps are changing these things. That is one of the reasons why direct messages from computer people so rarely get heard in other societies or in other communities. Because even if this one is correct, the problem is that the reality of other persons is not able to make this one a piece of the puzzle. So people live in different realities. And the reality of the communication partners plays an important role about the way these persons communicate, and the more the realities differ, the harder it is to do communication. Because the harder it is to address items in that puzzle directly. People always tend to stick to their own reality. They communicate always the same way, and they try it as they are used to it from their daily behavior. Respecting these details, the details of the reality of the person you are communicating with, makes it easier. Because people tend to use the messages they are used to and to address items they know. In practice, in news, a reader assumes that the content is relevant and makes sense, more or less. But the less contradiction the messages have in the whole text, and the better it fits to the day-to-day experience of the reader, the easier the reading is. It's not about understanding it. It begins with the reading of the text. Persons read a text easier if it fits in their reality. And the easier the text is read, the more worth a person applies to it. All these transmissions have messages. The primary message is the first visible content. It's the headline. It's what almost all people read as news. And it carries all of the important payload in small transmissions, like TV. The secondary message, well, with secondary messages, the rest of information is transmitted, and it is almost impossible to communicate without, because it's how the text looks like, it's the writing style, it's the clothing, it's even... Most of you will recognize if a text is written in a word processor or in LaTeX. This is a classical secondary message. It can be used, or it should be used, and mostly it is, to support the primary message. And in campaigns, when you group several transmissions in one group, then it makes sense to put the real payload in the secondary message and using easy primary messages. Why? Because sometimes you have to address other areas and you can stick what you really want to say in the secondary message. It's not an easy message to tell someone that, well, some people of the patent office do not know what they are talking about. And it's not easy to tell a diplomat that his patent office people do not tell the truth. This is something that in the first run has to be addressed in secondary messages. Inventing any kind of primary message about what to talk about and just leave the real content to secondary messages. There's also something called subliminals. They are often used in marketing campaigns. Like, well, women are happier when the clothes is more white. They sound promising, but they are not useful in practice outside of selling something. But it is very important not to send wrong subliminals. And there is another point. This point is about lying, and it's very important. Lies have a very, very high cost of ownership. Lies must be maintained. One of the main errors of the European Patent Office was lying about software patents. They had a plot. They had a plot about harmonization of the worldwide patent offices. That's not a really bad plan. That's something we could argue, that's something we could talk about. But because they started lying about software patents, they were unable to talk about their original plan, and they were bound to maintaining that lie, which they failed. They are very costly, and mostly it's not needed, because it's more or less the job of others, like patent offices or Sony